Sir, please, good morning.
Good morning.
Please, sir. Sir.
On तो है?
बोलिए.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, sir.
Okay.
So there are two audience view camera is there. One is focusing to our auditorium as well as one is focusing to our dais.
Right.
And two panels member are there. And, Mr. Ayush Nigam and
Mr. Sudhakar. I'm not able to hear what is being spoken from the podium. Is there deliberate?
auditorium mic is off.
Okay.
Kindly put on the auditorium mic on.
Yes.
Is it audible?
Yeah,
No.
now it is audible.
Right. So, sir, we'll start in another 5 minutes.
Okay.
A very good morning, everyone. I, Apurva Sharma, welcome you all back to IIC 2021. I hope everyone has had their breakfast and is ready to unleash this new day of the conference. Yesterday, we heard some very eminent people across industries who talked about various aspects relating to Uttar Pradesh's journey through their eyes, quoting some developments and identifying new opportunities for the wholesome development and growth of the state. Today, we have with us twice the numbers of these amazing guests as yesterday, and thus twice the enlightenment. Thus, I welcome you all to the second technical session of IIC 2021 on the topic From Farm to Table, Agriculture and Supply Chain. Interdependence, Integration and Co-Creation, IIC, was taken up as a subject matter for analysis and deliberation in the year 2006. Starting from the year 2006, IIC is an initiative to create a platform for industry leaders, academicians and researchers, decision makers from government and industry to come together, interact, and share their perspectives. The conference has grown in terms of participation of delegates and partners over the years. This year, resurgent and emerging state of Uttar Pradesh has been taken up for detailed deliberation. The chair for this technical session is the former Chief Secretary, Government of Uttar Pradesh, and a distinguished professor at Jaipur Institute of Management, Professor Alok Ranjit. I would like to welcome our esteemed guests to the Green Certificate. A Green Certificate is a unique initiative by Jaipur Institute of Management, wherein we plant a sapling in the name of our guests to make the earth a better place to live. Ayush, sir, this is for you. And Sudhakar, sir, welcome. This one is for you. Thank you, sir. Now I would like to take a moment to introduce our guests for the day. Mr. Ayush Nigam is the co-founder and CEO of Distinct Horizon. He is also the co-founder and head of strategy at PureScan AI. He was amongst the global top 20 future creators of 2017. Furthermore, he has been the co-founder and CEO of WCG Center for Social Innovation. Mr. Nigam has also worked as a business analyst at W1 Consulting Private Limited, head of innovation at White Swan Consulting Group, and as an analyst at both Nomura and Lehman Brothers. He was also awarded the prestigious USISCEF grant and also received the National Entrepreneurs Award in 2017. Our Another eminent speaker for the session is Mr. Sudhakar Tomar. He is the president of India Middle East Agro Trade Industry and Investment Forum and the managing director of Hakan Agro DNCC Dubai. He has also worked as the manager of international trade in the Aditya Birla group of companies. He is also the founding member and honorary chairperson of Global Pulse Confederation. Mr. Tomar has been awarded as the Business Leader of Year 2016 from DNCC, Forbes Top 100 Indian Leaders in the Arab World 2018, 2016, 2017, 2018, Outstanding Contribution Award 2017 from Ministry of Commerce, Government of India, Visionary Gulf Indian Leadership Award 2018 from Republic India. Pravasi Ratna Award 2017 from Indie and many such other awards. I welcome both the guests to the session. Moving ahead, I now request the session chair to kindly present the opening remarks.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction and also the welcome that you awarded to me as well as Mr. Ayush Nigam and Mr. Sudhakar Tomar. First of all, I would like to begin by complimenting the director of the Jaipuriya Institute of Management and the faculty, for holding this annual conference on a very, very important and vital topic of resurgent Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh, they have been focusing always on what kind of improvements can be brought about in handling the challenges of development related to the vast state of Uttar Pradesh. And I think this is very, very important for an academic institute like Jaipuriya, which is situated in Lucknow at the heart of Uttar Pradesh, and they are linking themselves with the community, with the society, and with the state as such. This is, I think, very, very commendable what the Institute of Management is doing, and the kind of topic they have chosen also. Why it is so relevant? I think everybody understands the importance of Uttar Pradesh. Just yesterday, I was hearing now the population of Uttar Pradesh, the recent count is 24 crores, 240 million. That kind of a population of a state. This kind of a state is already the 5th largest state in the world in terms of population. So the development of this state will be important for the development of the nation. It will either pull up the nation or it can even pull it downwards. So it is very important to focus on the development of the state. A lot of things are happening also. A lot of development initiatives are being taken almost every other day. So there's a lot of vibrancy, a lot of dynamism, which is there in the state. There's a lot of policy enabling environment that has been created, a lot of new schemes that have been introduced, a lot of work that has been done at the ground level in delivering the public services to the people. And as a result of which, things are happening, things are changing. It's not a static state. It's not a status quo state anymore. It is, let me say, it is a giant that has been woken up. It is an elephant which has woken up and is moving forward now. So it's a state which is called UP. And I always like to call it the state of UP means unlimited potential. So we have to unleash this unlimited potential of Uttar Pradesh. That is so very important. And that is why we are all here in this conference for 2 days to talk on various issues. And the most important one that we're going to talk of now is agriculture. And we have our 2 expert panelists who will be speaking on different aspects of agriculture and agri business after me. But for my opening remarks, I like to paint the agriculture scenario of the state vis-a-vis the nation also, and the kind of problems and challenges that are being faced by the state of Uttar Pradesh. Let me start by saying that we are a state which is predominantly an agricultural economy. It's 25% of our state domestic product comes from agriculture. But more important is that 65% of the people subsist on agriculture. So here there is a dichotomy, you see. 25% of the people of the GDP is coming from agriculture, and 65% are subsisting on this. This is the main cause for the poverty and the low per capita income that is there in the state of Uttar Pradesh. Unless the agriculture sector is revolutionized, unless there is a big change in this sector, unless the farmer's income is increased many-fold, unless people move from farm to non-farm, this kind of development that we want to talk about is not going to take place at all. So this is very, very vital that the agriculture sector in Uttar Pradesh is given the highest priority and it develops. Now, when we talk about Uttar Pradesh, further things I like to say is that because of the size also, Uttar Pradesh, has a lot of strengths when you come to agriculture. Not many people will be knowing that it is the largest producer in many things. It is the largest producer in wheat, in the country, largest producer in sugarcane in the country, largest producer of milk in the country, the largest producer of potato in the country, and even in fruits and vegetables, it's third overall. If you look at that. So it's that kind of scenario. The raw material is available. So much of produce is taking place in the state of Uttar Pradesh. But on the other side, why are the farmers not gaining so much out of it? That is because of the small land holdings, the pressure of population on the agricultural land, as a result of which the average land holding in Uttar Pradesh is 0.8 hectares. 0.8 hectares is very, very small, very small. Does it make it a viable holding? That's a question mark on that. It does not, to my mind. It makes it very difficult, in fact, for it to become a viable holding, for the farmers to invest in agriculture, for the farmers to become agri-entrepreneurs. There's a big challenge out there because of the smallness of the size of the land holdings in Uttar Pradesh. That apart, I mean, the overall scenario is such that the industrialization of the state, as the effort has been made considerably by the government to investment meets and to bring in investment in the state, but still there's a long way to go. And only when substantial investment takes place in the manufacturing sector will there be a pull of people from the farm sector to the non-farm sector, whereby the overall situation will improve, the overall income level will improve. That's the kind of trajectory or the path that development has to take place in the state of Uttar Pradesh. So then I think if I wanted to paint the scenario before you to understand what is happening in the state of Uttar Pradesh. Now, going a little deeper, when we look at agriculture, UP can be divided into several agroclimatic zones. In fact, there are as many as 9 agroclimatic zones in Uttar Pradesh. You know, the vastness of the state is such. And each agroclimatic zone needs a special strategy to tackle it. But for convenience sake, I'll just divide Uttar Pradesh into 3 to begin with. Let us say Western UP, Eastern UP, and the Bundelkhand region. Each one of these 3 are absolutely having a separate identity of their own. Western UP is more akin to Punjab and Haryana. The productivity levels are higher. They are focusing on sugarcane as a major crop and wheat and basmati rice. But then you come over to Eastern UP, the productivity levels are lower, definitely lower out here. And that is why the pressure of population on land is also much higher. And in Bundelkhand, it's a rain-fed area where only major one crop is taken in the year, even though there's vast potential for the development of horticulture crops in the area of Bundelkhand. So this is the kind of, if you look at geographically, this is the kind of situation that we have in the state of Uttar Pradesh. The first step is, I think, important when we're talking about farm to fork. That is the topic for today's discussion. How do you, link farm and the table? How do you bring what the farmer is producing to the table, meaning thereby the interest of the farmer is also taken care of, the interest of the consumer is also taken care of. Both gain. It has to be a win-win kind of a situation. So, first of all, the farmer has, and his productivity has to be enhanced. Second, as a step, whatever he produces, he has to get a market where he gets the right kind of price for his produce. Third, he can be having the ability to store his produce and do post-harvest management in a big way, because that is the only way he can lead to value addition, which is essential. Unless there is value addition, there is not going to be any gain in income for the farmer. And only when value addition takes place can we talk of agri-entrepreneurs coming up in the state of Uttar Pradesh. So we have to have reforms at the level of input, and we have to have reforms at the level of management of agriculture. We have to have reforms at the level of the agriculture market. I think the last, to my mind, is the most important, because to a large extent, the input scenario has been taken care of, even though there are some issues. But today, the real challenge is the market. And the market reforms are what are essential for the state of Uttar Pradesh to develop. Let me say a few things from my experience. I was also the Agriculture Production Commissioner of Uttar Pradesh for more than 3 years. And before that, in various capacities in the districts as district magistrate. We used to always focus on inputs at one time. Our focus used to be only on providing inputs to the farmers. What inputs? High yielding variety seeds, making them available, providing subsidy for the seeds. Then we introduced a scheme of, having online registration of the farmers and sending the subsidy directly to their accounts. That was a major innovation. Direct cash benefit transfer, thereby ensuring that actually the subsidy seed for the seeds went to the actual farmers. Then the fertilizer scenario. There used to be a time when there used to be tremendous shortage of fertilizer, and there used to be law and order disturbances all over the state as farmers used to agitate and fertilizer was not reaching them on time. But somehow now, because of the intervention of the central government as well as state government, that situation has been handled to quite a large extent. Today, the management of fertilizer is required, but there is no shortage of fertilizer as such anyway. There's no shortage of seeds anyway. So inputs are being made available now to the farmer, and farmer is also made aware of the inputs, that these are the inputs I have to use if I want to bring about enhancement in my productivity. However, there's a question mark there. Farmer is overusing fertilizer. Government of India has come up with a very innovative soil health card initiative, that the soil will be tested and each farmer will be given a soil health card, which will be depicting the health of his soil and also indicating what fertilizer and what quantity he should apply. But unfortunately, my experience has been, though soil testing has been done, soil health cards have been prepared, farmers are not really using it. Today, they're using as much fertilizer as possible. They believe the more the fertilizer they put, the higher the productivity, which is leading to depletion of the fertility of the soil. Top soil is being getting depleted. It is leading to all kinds of other issues which are coming up. Health issues related with that, pollution issues related with that. That's why there is some stress also on talking about organic farming, of coming back to organic farming, of reducing the use of chemical fertilizers. All this talk is going on because somehow the usage of fertilizer has not been done in a scientific manner by the farmers. More the merrier is the principle that they have been using. And third, a very critical input has been ignored. Let me bring this to your notice, ladies and gentlemen, that a very critical input is water. And somehow we always believe that water is in abundance. So Uttar Pradesh has been lucky. We are a land of rivers, Ganga, Yamuna, and so on and so forth, with a high water table also in most parts of the state. So now many blocks are becoming dark blocks. Many blocks are becoming critical because of over-exploitation of the groundwater. But all said and done, we have water available, but we are not utilizing the water properly. Irrigation potential in Uttar Pradesh is 80% of the area in Uttar Pradesh is irrigated. I don't know how many of you know this figure. It's a very good figure really to have as compared to states like Maharashtra or other states. 80% of the state of Uttar Pradesh is irrigated, but the utilization of irrigation water is not more than 50%. So the first critical challenge is how you make the entire irrigation potential that has been created, utilize it, make the water reach in the right quantity at the right time to the farmer's field. And more so, I think we have to give more attention to water. It is now no longer an abundant commodity. We cannot extract groundwater in an unlimited manner. We cannot exploit the river water in an unlimited manner. And therefore, technologies like sprinkler irrigation, drip irrigation become extremely important in the state of Uttar Pradesh, where each drop of water, as the Honorable Prime Minister said, has to count. We must get productivity out of each drop of water. You have to monitor that. In that kind of discipline, when it comes only, then we can have a future where we can secure our water reserves and also utilize the water properly. Of course, this also means that you have a cropping pattern which is related to that. So today, I found in Uttar Pradesh, in vast areas, people are growing mentha as a crop because it gives very good profits. Now, mentha is a water guzzling crop. And even in areas of Bundelkhand, people are trying to grow mentha. The amount of water it takes away from the groundwater, it is not a crop which should be easily gone into. But just because it gives short-term profits, the farmers are going in for it in a big way. Even sugarcane, which is a major crop for Uttar Pradesh, especially Western UP, is consuming large amounts of water. So we have to think how even sugarcane, if we can introduce drip irrigation technologies or water monitoring technologies whereby we conserve water in production of sugarcane. And along with sugarcane, we have multi-cropping or intercropping. Now that kind of, or diversification from sugarcane to even agroforestry, for instance, that so that the income level of the farmer does not go down in any situation. So these are the various issues that we have to keep in mind when you talk of inputs. Now let me move on to the crucial area, which I said earlier about market reforms. Market reforms are so very important. Marketing has been done through agriculture mandis. Over the last 50 years, I've noticed the entire pressure has been on mandis, where you can go and sell your produce, and there are middlemen out there who purchase your produce as a license for that. For quite some time, there's been talk of reforming this structure. And recently, you must have read about the agriculture sector reforms, which have created some issues within the country because the farmers are agitating against it. And the government is also trying to put forward the view that these market reforms are major structural reforms and ultimately benefit the farmer. What these market reforms are saying is that now the agriculture produce it does not necessarily sell to your nearest mandi. You can sell it anywhere at the farm gate or anywhere to anybody. So that kind of freedom of choice is given to the farmer. The freedom of choice ultimately should lead to the farmer getting the right price for his produce. That is what is the objective of that. And not be exploited just by being forced to sell it at one place. The second is about contract farming and enabling legislation, which says that you can go in for contract farming, which means that big corporations or even industries can come in and they can buy produce from the farmer and add value to it for the market. Now, that kind of a scenario is possible also through contract farming and enabling legislation. And third is about, of course, stock limits being removed as far as the Essential Commodities Act is concerned. But there are issues regarding these reforms. That is why the farmers are taking them up also. The main issue to my mind, of course, is while everything is all right, the farmer today is still a very small and marginal farmer. And he's a small and marginal farmer. How can he parley on equal terms in the market with, say, a large public sector or a multinational corporation or a large corporation? He has to be equipped to be able to bargain on equal terms. And that he does not have either the knowledge or the economic strength to do it. So what is important for that is, I say the solution to my mind is, and the government of India has been talking about it also, is to develop farmer producer companies or farmer producer organizations in a big way, in a large way. Aggregation of farmers is required. When you aggregate the farmers, earlier model was aggregation through the cooperatives. And you know the Amul story. All of you know the Amul story as far as the milk is concerned. They brought about a revolution in the country through cooperatives and higher income to the farmers also, and milk processing, and making it available to the consumer. But unfortunately, the cooperative model in states like Uttar Pradesh, due to political interference, has not succeeded to that extent. You find success stories of cooperatives in the states of Gujarat, in the state of Maharashtra, but not so in the state of Uttar Pradesh. Therefore, I'm not advocating the cooperative model so much for Uttar Pradesh, but I'm advocating the farmer producer company model, which should be a professional company, a professional body with legal team, with a contract management team, with finance people, with marketing experts, and where each farmer is made a member of it and has equal share in it, in equal right in the whole business operations, and they together take business decisions, whether it is about providing inputs or whether it is about finding the right kind of market and what kind of crops to grow and what kind of even arrangements they should enter into industrial corporations. So if farmer producer companies are really properly created and they become operational, this aggregation of farmers will lead to a situation where farmers will be able to take advantage of an open market. Otherwise, there is definitely an inherent danger of their getting exploited. And second, the regulatory mechanism has to be built in. Already, the reforms have suggested a regulatory mechanism. Maybe we may have to have an independent regulator rather than going to the district administration. Let us have an independent regulator who can regulate between the multinational corporations and the farmers, so that any dispute which occurs can be resolved in a time-bound manner to the satisfaction of both the parties. That kind of scenario that we are able to create, I think this will be very, very extremely significant. Now, let me add two other things I think are very, very important. Storage. Government of India has allocated about 1 lakh crore for storage, for cold storage to come up, for cold chains to come up at the farm gate. This is very essential. If the farmer has to grow a produce and to get the right price, then he should be able to decide when to sell it. When to sell it means that he does not do distress selling. So he should store his produce. Number one, he should be able to store it till the right price comes in the market, and then he offloads into the market. So that kind of storage infrastructure has to be created. Unfortunately, the post-harvest and the storage structure is absent in India at the moment to a large extent. And this has to be focused on, and Government of India has provided incentives and a scheme for this, which should be taken full advantage of by the farmers and by the state governments. And I think Uttar Pradesh government should also gain a lot if we invest heavily in post-harvest management infrastructure and invest through farmer producer companies. That will be the best possible solution in my mind. Now, but even in that, there is a question, why does the farmer do distress selling? He does distress selling because he needs money immediately. He needs money for his social needs. He needs money or for the next crop. So the best solution here again is that when he stores it in a government-approved warehouse, which is being a Warehouse Development Regulatory Authority compliant warehouse, he should get a warehouse receipt, which becomes a negotiable instrument. And against that warehouse receipt, he should be able to draw finance from the banks up to 75% of the value of his produce. If he does that, then he can withstand the pressures of the market, hold on to his stock, and avoid distress selling. So I think another major innovation in my mind is warehouse receipt to be made a negotiable instrument, and to have a pattern whereby the banks will be financing against warehouse receipt up to a certain amount, so that the immediate needs of the farmers are taken care of. Then value addition is so vital, and most of my other speakers will be speaking on that. How, if we are hardly doing any value addition. From farm to fork is the main topic today. Only table varieties things are being grown, which are coming in unprocessed form to the table. See the example of potato. Potato is a major crop in Uttar Pradesh. Only those varieties are grown which are for edible varieties for eating as a vegetable. And that is where the potato comes from the farmer to the table. But there is so much scope for value addition. Just now PepsiCo is now coming up with a plant in Mathura for preparing chips. It's converting to chips or into potato powder or into any various other, even to the extent of there was talk of even going into vodka, for instance. So there are so many value addition things which can take place if you go crop by crop and analyze. But that value addition environment has to be created. I have noticed that somehow many farmers on their own have gone into this by coming together and approaching the industrial sector. Just around Lucknow, there has been a revolution as far as banana cultivation goes. Banana gives you 1 lakh per hectare as compared to wheat and paddy. And most of the farmers in Barabanki, in Faizabad, in Kausambi, in Fatehpur are now diversified into banana crops on their own. And they're getting a ready market. They're finding buyers who are coming to them directly and buying bananas from them and taking it to the market. This kind of significant change has to come about where the linkage to the market, to the processing industry has to be established, and both have to move forward. The enabling environment has to be there, and certain other mechanisms have to be there to ensure that the farmer is not exploited and that the industry also gets a decent return. Only then this kind of a situation is possible. Now, when I say this, let me say a little more on when agri-business entrepreneur, we talk of developing the farmer as an agri-entrepreneur. Well, let us not ignore the animal husbandry sector. The dairy sector has vast potential in the state of Uttar Pradesh. Most farmers can become major dairy farmers. The fisheries sector, fisheries can make them all into major entrepreneurs where they can earn huge amount of income to the fisheries sector. Then, at my time when I was Agriculture Production Commissioner, I introduced the poultry development scheme in Uttar Pradesh. We used to import 1 crore eggs from outside to the state of Uttar Pradesh every day. Every day, 1 crore eggs were imported. And when we developed the poultry sector, that figure, I believe, has now come down to 60 lakhs. But there's scope to bring it down to zero and even make Uttar Pradesh an exporter of poultry products. So this is the kind of situation where we have agriculture allied activities focusing on horticulture. For instance, Bundelkhand, it can become, as I said always, the Israel of Uttar Pradesh. Bundelkhand has that kind of potential. It can become the Israel of Uttar Pradesh because it can grow horticulture crops in a big way and add the value of the farmers. So I think this is the overall scenario I wanted to paint about Uttar Pradesh, where we have to operate now on the market side, bring about major market reforms, bring about an increase in the income of the farmer, make him an agri-business entrepreneur, bring about linkages between farm and non-farm activities. And finally, the last word I'd like to say is, we must make Uttar Pradesh a hub of rural industrialization. Let us not have our labor going outside to work in various states as construction workers and live in slums. Why don't they get opportunities for employment nearby when rural industries will come up? Rural agro-based industries. There's a vast potential for rural agro-based industries to come up in all parts of the state of Uttar Pradesh. So that is the kind of situation which has to come. So these are, I think, some of my initial remarks. I'll come back to you when I sum up what the other two speakers have spoken and if any other idea has come up. But I think this should be able to set the tone for the kind of discussion that we want to have. We have with us a very distinguished panel, Ayush Nigam, who's CEO of Distant Horizon. He's a social entrepreneur as well as an agri-entrepreneur. He's a change maker, a young man. Let me now first go to Mr. Ayush Nigam and ask him to give his presentation on what he has to say about what the private sector can do about bringing about resurgence in the state of Uttar Pradesh and in the sphere of agriculture, and how can we link the farm to the port. Mr. Ayush Nigam, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ranjan. I think that was an amazing opening statement that you made. I think a lot of very in-depth knowledge about how the system can overall at a macro level become much better, much stronger to actually solve these issues on the ground. So I think that was very, very informative for me and everyone, I'm sure. So coming to the enterprise mode, I'll more stick to that and what startups and private sector can do to really reform this sector particularly. So let me first talk about there are the gaps that exist in the system. and how an entrepreneur or an innovator for that matter could look at this situation and find opportunities and solve them. So I think from the bottom up, how can we reform the system? I'll probably go from there. So in terms of the agri ecosystem currently, there are far too many, as Mr. Ranjan, you were rightly pointing out, there are far too many apps that exist today. And as entrepreneurs, of course, those gaps are actually opportunities. And that's where we look at any sort of side. It could be finance, as you were mentioning. It could be quality issues. It could be connecting farm to fork. It could be agri machinery. It could be IoT, AI, machine learning, data processing. It could be satellite imaging. Uh, there are far too many, food processing, far too many things to be done. And clearly, almost in every space, there are opportunities out there. Now, let me talk about some very specific few examples. Now, say for example, if we talk about the world turning to healthy foods these days, so I think that is another very interesting opportunity, not just in India but also an export market that could open up. Say for example, there is a very interesting trend shifting towards mock meats. There is an interesting trend towards healthy snacks, like say yoga bar is coming up. A lot of these companies are gaining a lot of interest. There is 24 Mantra, which suddenly came up and became such a big company in such a short time. So again, in the food packaging, food processing space, there is a lot again that entrepreneurs could do. So clearly, both on farm and off farm, there is a lot that can be done, and there is a lot of scope for innovation. So now come to the role that startups play in the bigger ecosystem. Of course, doing these innovations, trying to solve these problems at a particular point is what startups do. However, let me emphasize on this particular role, um, as in how this role plays a slightly bigger, as in has a slightly bigger impact than just the reach that the startup is able to achieve on its own. What happens, I feel, in the ecosystem whenever a startup gets out a new innovation or a solution to the market, there are people who get inspired. So there is a role of the entrepreneur as an inspiring agent. And I think that is something very critical. So bringing out innovative solutions to inspire both the government, private sector, and even other entrepreneurs for that matter, right? So whenever we come out with certain solutions in the market, like say again, like I'll take the example of mock meat. So mock meat, certain startups started, they became really famous, really big, etc. And that's when a lot of other entrepreneurs came into the market globally, trying to come up with better mock meats, etc. Right? So there is a big ripple effect when something is well proven. So that kind of an impact of a ripple, or big ripples that an entrepreneurial innovation can have, uh, should be looked at very seriously. Again, very similarly, even the government for that matter, when they bring in a lot of new practices into the larger state level or national level sort of policies, a lot of it also is influenced by a lot of these innovations that are coming up on the ground and are clearly seen as potential change makers for the country at large or the state at large. And that's where the government can pick them up and take them to scale. So definitely there is a very good hand in hand sort of role when it comes to small enterprises or entrepreneurs, and people and youngsters, or a lot of experienced people bringing in energy into this system and bringing out innovations, and showing the examples and acting as inspiring agents and innovation agents, problem solvers, is a huge thing. So finally, what I would like to add on this, of course, it is a tough journey. I would probably also like to talk very briefly later. I'll come back to that later, probably, if Mr. Ranjan, if you feel that's appropriate. In terms of few challenges that we faced along the way, and how setting up an enterprise, of course, can have its own challenges, and how can see the light and tunnel. So briefly, probably I would love to share that if possible. However, coming back, so I think coming back to the ecosystem, right? So the ecosystem has a very major role to play. I think as far as where UP stands today, I think there is a lot of improvement scope that exists. Of course, there are places like Bangalore that are far ahead and know it, accept it, and learn from what the other locations or other countries, Singapore, maybe Silicon Valley, several places in China are. India is definitely doing really well on startup ecosystem front. The government is playing a very pivotal role right now. I think a lot of the policies are very supportive to startups. We are seeing that everywhere in the country. However, I would still say that at the micro level, there can be more focused efforts to really inspire youngsters and experienced people to feel comfortable in jumping at the initial level, getting that right kind of inspiration, that learning attitude, all those really matter. So can we have that passion, that zeal, that real world problems? How can we develop that further? So maybe more learning of real problems to help in people finding out actual issues that they want to solve. Like get that inspiration to really go and solve some problem. A lot of that at the micro level, at the universities, etc., could be focused on incubators, could be focusing on a lot more of it as well, coming from inside. Like how can we that? I'm just keep that as an open. Maybe we can go into it later as well. But I think the ecosystem is an important thing. There are few gray areas that I feel, especially in terms of the micro level and inspiration that needs to happen, and the initial support that needs to happen. So just leave it at that right now, and probably come back later.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ayush Nigam. I'm sure I'll come back to you later, as you said, and ask you to speak about your experiences about this startup and how you went about it and how you think one should go about it. You did speak about the gaps and opportunities that exist today as far as India is concerned and as far as Uttar Pradesh is also concerned, and the kind of space that is available in the food processing sector. New products are coming up, new innovations are coming up almost every other day. And I think we rightly said what we require is an ecosystem for the startups. And you said like Bangalore, for instance, has a much better ecosystem than today. Maybe Lucknow may not be having that much. We are aware of that in Uttar Pradesh. I think why Uttar Pradesh government, I think, has come up with a vibrant policy for startups, is also encouraging a lot of incubation centers and academic institutions. And Uttar Pradesh has some strengths also because a lot of technical institutes are here. And a lot of engineers and other graduates coming up from the state of Uttar Pradesh who can become, entrepreneurs, who can come up with innovations, who can go into the startup sector. So there is a change that is taking place, though of course not of that level as yet.
Mr. Ranjan, I would just like to add one more question here.
Yeah,
what do you think about getting real exposure to students in terms of not just what the industry is doing, but also in terms of what the real issues, problems are? Can there be some kinds of exposure trips or more of such discussions and talks that students are exposed to? How does that learning culture of real issues come out so that the problems are more the solutions that students or people come out with are more focused on real needs, real problems, than just building a startup?
No, you're right, absolutely. Yes. That we have, the students have to be exposed to the real life situations. And I think Jaipur Institute is also trying that by linking whatever the students are doing in their academic world to the real life situations, giving them projects in those areas, at making them attend webinars or seminars in this real life experience stories being told by people who have succeeded in life and how they've done. And also, as you rightly said, trips, they can be taken out to visit industries or startups and to see how people are working. I think you're right. This kind of an atmosphere has to be focused on. Only then can people will be attracted towards it. Some innovators will emerge from within this itself. So I think you rightly talked about an ecosystem and also about the inspiring effect when the new idea comes up, the ripple effect when it is taken up and adopted by others, and how government can play a major role by scaling up a successful innovation. So yes, and you rightly said you would like to come back a little later also to talk on some personal experience also in this line. I'll certainly come back to you after we hear Mr. Sudhakar Tomar, Managing Director of Hakim Agro DMCC Dubai, and is a global agri business person expert. Let's hear what he has to say about the global agribusiness scenario and also what the Western innovation, this Middle East market and other issues, agri exports maybe he'd like to talk on. I don't know what he'd like to focus on. So let's have Mr. Sudhakar Tomar, please.
Sir, your mic is on mute.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आलोक जी. Thank you very much. First of all, I must say a very big thank you and congratulations to the Board of Governors of Jaipuria Institute, Mr. Sharad Jaipuria ji, Dr. Kavita, Dr. Sunil, Dr. Atar, and Ayush. I've been listening to these deliberations since yesterday. They're very informative and very thought-provoking. And I like very much what Alok ji just said, UP being synonymous with ultimate potential. And I'll also add my interpretation of UP as, I would call it ultimate and progress. A state which can send 9 prime ministers to the nation. So the potential is definitely something which can always be unleashed, even if we have not reached our right potential as yet. So the format which I want to have today, I mean, since we have, I hope we have enough time to more interactive, not so much what I have to say. So as I don't consider myself an agri expert, I consider more of a constant learner or a student of agri dynamics globally. Because when we talk about agriculture and food, it is not really an economic activity. It is all over the world, especially in our country or in say in Asia and Africa. Food and agriculture is a socio-economic and political activity. So it has so many dimensions that you cannot view it only in one aspect or in isolation. So with that perspective, first, I would say why agriculture, food is so important for anyone, not only for our state or for our country. And then what is the current state of global food supply or the trends? There are about 13 major trends which are happening right now, and how we can participate in these trends and benefit in India. And then we can go into more questions and answers, and I'm here to learn from you all as well. So when we talk about importance of agriculture for any nation, I am fortunate enough, at least now I consider myself fortunate enough, because I was born in a farming family back home in Hardoi in Uttar Pradesh. So I've seen the plight of a small farmer. And then my father had to take up a job, so I traveled with him all over the state in different villages, towns, tehsils and districts, and then moved to now to Delhi and then to international place. So I've seen the whole spectrum from a small farmer to a large multinational who's doing business or involved in agriculture. So agriculture is very important because Alfred Lewis once said that there are only 9 meals between mankind and anarchy. You can keep people without shelter, you can keep people without clothing, but you cannot keep them on hungry stomach. And this was evident in Spring Revolution when 23 countries, the regime was toppled just because there was a food insecurity. And especially for a country like ours, India, it is extremely important because 68% of the population, or 7 out of 10 people, are directly or indirectly dependent on agriculture. Unfortunately, they contribute only 16 to 18% to GDP. You cannot have a sustainable country if 7 out of 10 people contribute only 16% to GDP. That becomes a liability. You have to involve them in a way that they become an engine in your economic growth, not a liability. So it is extremely important that we treat agriculture in India as an economic activity and bring it into the mainstream of commercials. Imagine we have a tax collection system where only 1 out of 10 or 1.5 out of 10 people pay tax and that sustains 9 people, this is not sustainable in long term. So that's why agriculture is so important. Now, let me just take you quickly through the global trends in agriculture, and that will give you an idea of what is going on in the world. So when you look at, sorry, when you look at the world as a total, world as a nation, um, and look at the today's population of about 7.2 billion people, and divide the total amount of food um, by the population, we get a comfortable 2,722 calories. That means theoretically there is enough food available for each person globally. But unfortunately, that is not the situation, because the right food at the right place at the right price is not uh, available. And when you put this fact in the background that our population, the global population is increasing, we are at 7.2, we will become 10 billion people in 2050. At the same time, the global food production is kind of stagnating, but the demand of food is increasing. And when the demand for food is increasing even at a fraction of a percent, then it becomes difficult to sustain that production. And at the same time, our eating habits are changing. It is a fact then when people become richer, which of course the world is getting richer, um, then there is a more consumption of fats and oils, which are high water, high carbon efficient crops. And at the same time, if you throw in this another dynamics of high energy prices, then you also end up burning your essential food for oil production, which we have seen when the oil prices were spiking. And the seventh trend is that all over the world, recently in about few years, the governmental protectionism is increasing all over the world. And the cost of agriculture inputs also keeps increasing. And as if this is not enough, we have the global finance industry, because they cannot make enough profit from other activities. They get involved in the agriculture, and that, of course, might be good for the first world, but it is not so beneficial for Asia and Africa, where the food is the main is a matter of livelihood, it's a matter of vocation. And then the last four trends are that the world is getting more and more urbanized. Even in India, we see a huge increase in the population moving from the villages to the cities. Um, and with black swan events like or pandemics like COVID, or any kind of sudden shocks, or economic shocks also make situation very difficult. And last 2 points are the climate change. It is something which we see, but because it is not a critical or urgent thing, so we don't really talk about it. But if you see, if you really analyze the trend in last 10 years, we have these erratic weather events, which put a huge pressure on the various crops. And there is a study by Food and Agriculture Organization that between from now till next 10 years time, if the climate change effects are there, then the prices of 14 staple crops will go up as high as from 50 to 85%. And last, what Ayush also said, there is a massive ag tech, agriculture technology infusion in agriculture, which is good because this will help increase the production. Whether this is going to be good for a country like India, where we are resources rich in terms of people, whether this is going to be beneficial for them. So these are 13 major trends which are impacting our agriculture. But now I want you to put these 13 trends in a context that despite these things, or despite enough food being available on the planet, theoretical availability, we still have about 800 million people who go to bed hungry every day. They suffer from chronic hunger. And about 1 billion people do not have access to clean drinking water. And 2 billion suffer from some form of malnutrition. And as a result of that, every day, just put this in perspective about COVID or or what I'm going to say is that every day about 35,000 people die every day. 30. So in the duration of these 2 days conference, you have 70,000 people dying from hunger and waterborne diseases. So these are some facts which we are grappling with. And so while on one hand this is happening, we also have food wastage. About 30 to 35% of the food everywhere, including from the first world where they wasted from the fridge to the table. In Asia, which I mean, say for a country like India, or we waste our food from the farm to by the time it reaches consumption, about 35% due to infrastructural constraints and storages. Second effect of this functional system is that also because we have been using the water irrationally, in next 10 to 15 years, we will need to increase the water demand or water supply by 50%. And water is a finite resource. It's not easy to increase. And we also have declining land availability, especially the agricultural land availability is declining. And the most tantalizing fact which I'm going to tell you is that in next 40 years, not in next 100 years, next 30 to 40 years, the world need to produce enough food which we produced in last 10,000 years. So next 40 years, given all these constraints, we need to produce food which we produced in last 10,000 years. So when you look at these kind of complexities and apply these things in Indian perspective, we have a population of 1.23 billion people. We have land, and when you divide the total land by the population, I think we are left with like 0.10 hectare per person. This is finite. Population is increasing, so we need to have sustainable agriculture production in India and also expand our supply chains in an efficient and long-term way, not in a short term. So fortunately, what we have seen is that we had a dysfunctional system going for decades. We see certain things which are happening. It is a non-political forum, so I don't want to discuss anything much about that. But yes, we need to fix our agriculture very soon, because this. It might not be very what I call urgent. Is imagine a phone is ringing, so your tendency is to pick up, but it might not be important. So this is something which is really critical and important. So we as citizens, policymakers must have a plan to make India agri reliant. And there I am in full support of Atmanirbhar, because we have seen this scenario in my adopted country, United Arab Emirates. There was a very distinct policy of being self-reliant, and which came very handy during the COVID times when the supply chains were disrupted. And fortunately, in a country where 90% food is imported, there was zero supply chain shocks. There were no queuing, there were no writing, and we passed this COVID very peacefully. And I am here to discuss more on this. Back to Alokji.
Thank you, Mr. Sudhakar Tomar. And well, as you rightly said, you have been from a family of farmers, so you understand what farming is all about, the pain that the farmer has to go through. And you rightly talked about how we move from a small farm to an international business, that whole scenario of the agriculture sector. I think what is very valuable, how you painted the scenario that is there about food production. That today there may be theoretically enough food available, but there is so much unequal distribution that 800 million people are going hungry every day. And so many people are dying of hunger or waterborne diseases. 1 billion people not having access to clean water. That is not a very acceptable or attainable situation. And so how is this happening? Why is this happening? Is it because of increase in population, or is it because of inequality of distribution, or is it because of policies at the state country level or at the international level, or because of the trends of globalization, or what is it that is leading to this? And how can we tackle this situation? It is very urgent, very important when you look at it from a global scenario. Also, when you look at it from the Indian point of view, and you said Atmanirbhar, self-reliance. Agriculture is one sector definitely where we have to be self-reliant. We can't look towards others for meeting our needs for food. That is very important. And then you rightly pointed about areas like climate change and technology infusion, water availability, land availability as some of the critical factors when we talk about development of agriculture. And I must thank you also for saying that Uttar Pradesh is a state which has got ultimate progress state. You know, ultimate progress is possible here if the potential of the state is unleashed in the right amount. Now, we have about, say, 17 to 18 minutes more of this session with us. Uh, could we take some responses from the audience and maybe some reactions from the panelists to the reactions? Mr. Amitabh Ghosh, is that possible? We can take some reactions from the audience?
Yes, sir, we are trying to.
Please, let's have 1 or 2 or 3, 4 reactions to which the panelists can respond. We have about 17 to 18 minutes of the session left with us.
Audience, if you have any question, audience in the auditorium, if you have any question, please raise your hand so that we can reach you.
Sudhakarji, taking the liberty. Thank you
Yes,
so much, Alokji, Ayush, and Sudhakarji for wonderful insights. There's a bit of a separation when we teach business between the Bharat and India. So coming from these eminent panelists, and I'll request Sudhakarji, drawing upon your experience of being a part of the rural landscape, what are the competencies? What is the kind of sensitivity do you think? Would you like to see in an MBA graduate? We are trying to think of graduate attributes and graduate outcomes. How important is being aware of Bharat and its limitation for a business graduate?
Yeah, Mr. Sudhakar, would you like to respond?
Yeah, that's a very, very relevant question and very close to my heart, because there is a huge disconnect within India between, as you rightly said, the India and Bharat. When I was in the village or the small kasbah or this town, and when you come to the big city, even my friends had never seen a real Indian village. Forget about foreigners. And what we must understand that India is progressing. Largely, I would say, whatever is happening in the big cities or the metropolises, and then we see this kind of progress. So imagine if we include, if we involve 68%, or I would rather say 80%, because I even consider the peripheral people living in the cities or the urban slums also marginalized, and along with the rural poor. If we involve this 80% of the population in the mainstream, we bring them, we design policies including them, then imagine the kind of potential that India can have. Right now, unfortunately, the decisions related to, say, food or agriculture have been made for decades on a political considerations. If we make those decisions on long-term considerations, it will be painful initially, like what we have been seeing right now, but that is the right therapy for long-term. And if that happens, and if even half of the people of these 80% come in the mainstream, you will see the kind of India which is really, really unimaginable. And at the same time, what we also need to understand, especially people living in the cities, the English-speaking elite, or the people who become educated, and that these 80%, we cannot close our eyes to them. Because at the end of the day, after not now, maybe 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line, this will become such a huge liability that we might face the scale of things which happen in Africa or something. So we have to include them. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that it is not a liability, it's an asset, it's just untapped potential lying in your warehouse, which you have not been using. So yes, this is the, in my take on this.
I was hoping for a from a student's perspective. What should they cultivate in themselves in the next 2 years? They'll be graduating. They'll be out in the market, hoping for an air-conditioned office and a very comfortable lifestyle. Where is the next stage of growth coming?
Of course. So I'm sure you have. The many institutes have rural marketing courses. I'm sure you do have as well. The idea is to look beyond being expert in rural marketing, beyond looking them as a marketplace for selling toothpaste and oils and shampoos. Make sure that this 60 or to 70% chunk of the population has the same level of um, sophistication, knowledge, education, opportunities, that this market, we do not need to teach a rural marketing course. The whole country should be in a such way that it becomes a market of 1.2 billion people, because that is our strength. Yesterday, I was listening to Mr. Arun Maira, and he very rightly said that our strength is people. That is our resource. I mean, every country has a resource, and India's resource, prime resource, is people. So the more bigger, efficient, prosperous this marketplace becomes, better it is for all of us. And for students to benefit from this segment, the one thing they must have is the compassion. Not only in economic terms, they should understand that these are their fellow brethren, and they have to also benefit the same economic fruits which we have been earning. So compassion and an understanding, and for that, of course, the practical steps of field trips, rural marketing courses, more and more interaction is absolutely. Maybe you should have a scholarship program where you sponsor 10, 20, children every session from the disadvantaged areas, and I'd be very much happy to cooperate with that. So yes, I mean, I'm here all the time. Whatever the good ideas, very much ready ready to take forward those.
Thank you, Mr. Sudhakar. I think I like Mr. Ayush Nigam also to respond to this question of the director, because you talked about your, when you made your presentation, you talked about how we should give students some real life exposure. I think that is the kind of thing what the director is, Dr. Pathak is also talking about. What can we bring about in the MBA program to make the students respond to this kind of a situation in the agriculture sector? And you were saying something. Would you like to add to what you were saying?
Sure. I think Mr. Sudhakar already, I think, spoke about the important points that I was also feeling very strongly. So two things. So one, I think empathy, and the second word, I would say compassion, right? Like if that compassion for people, firstly, understanding, empathizing, actually understanding their situation. And secondly, the level of compassion and feeling that I really want to do something about this. I think these two are very important. If, as Madam was saying, like, what do we need in these students? I think these are two things that I would expect. And then once these two things are there, then I think they would have the fire to figure out the remaining things. They would want to go the extra mile to make that happen. So I am more coming from that understanding perspective. Now, as again, Mr. Sudhakar was also saying, in terms of having more exposure, like the trips, as I was mentioning, and he also mentioned, like even fellowships and such things where even students from such communities come. And on the other hand, even there are fellowships like say, for example, the Teach India Fellowship, right? Like, or I think Jagriti Yatra sort of things, right? So I think those kind of things, if they could be done even at a college level, this has a lot of such exposure practices. So can we build in more of such exposure practices that are performed by colleges or institutions like this? I think that might help. Jagriti Yatra might be a great example. It might not be as elaborate, but at least can we have that sprinkled into the system for small programs, like a week or something here and there. I think that might really add. And even the second point, I think it might be having like on one hand the exposure to the reality, but also on the other hand, if there are also people who have who are experts in this area of understanding the social economic conditions, also maybe being a part of it or separately. I think exposure to both of these things would really help in culminating this compassion and empathy.
Yeah, you're right. I think I must share with you that Jaipuria Institute of Management, the philosophy that they're working on, I think I must appreciate what the director and the faculty and the promoters all are thinking about, that education is not restricted to the classroom. They want to take it beyond the classroom and take it to the community, really. They're telling the professors, telling the students to reach out to the community, the real life problems of the community, and try to respond to it. And then one example of what you were saying about what Mr. Sudhakar said, that many people have not even seen a village. Well, they just started a rural outreach program this year. A very good 2-day program when students went out in groups and worked. Actually, they went and lived in the village and met with the people out there to understand what a village was like. You know, we may have some theoretical notions about what a village is like, what the problems of farmer is like. But when we go there, sit with them, understand their real life situations and issues, then we understand what the real problem is. Then maybe it is not only just rural marketing. Then we are able to understand how these people think, how they behave. And then that is where that compassion and empathy will come in a real way, as both of you have talked about. I think this is, I just wanted to inform you about this. Anybody else would like to make some comment or raise an issue, please? We have a couple of minutes more. Nobody?
My question is to you, how would you define a farmer in the rich world and in the poor world?
And it's not very clear. Can you just put the mic near and speak?
Okay. So I'm audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is, how would you define a farmer in the rich world and in the poor world?
How would you involve the farmer in the?
Farmer in the rich world and in the poor world?
Okay. Have you been able to hear the question, the panelists? Would like to say something?
Can you repeat? Is he saying how can we involve farmer in the supply chain in the rich world, something like this?
No, sir. No, sir. I am saying that. How would you define a farmer in the rich world and in the poor world?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, okay, the difference between a farmer in the rich world and the poor world. Okay, so let's say a farmer so of course, we have a small family farm, which we think is a large farm. So when I made my first trip to Canada 20 years back, and I was talking to a farmer there, and he says, "Oh, I have a small farm, and we only 4 people work on this farm." I said, "How big is your farm?" He says, "Only 2,500 acres," and that was a small farm from the Western world, from the Canadian perspective. But keeping that aside, the difference between a farmer in rich world and the poor world is that the farmer in rich world has a choice to farm. In poor world, the farmer does not have a choice. It is his destiny or his helplessness that which is making him do the farming. The day he has, if the present situation continues, the day he has other choices, he will move to other vocations. So the basic fundamental difference is that in the rich world, the farmer has a choice to farm because it's an economic activity. And in a poor world, the farmer has no other choice. That's why he's forced to farm to have a sustenance and to have a living. Other than that, when he's doing this kind of subsistence farming, then he is not worried about education because he wants to have as many children as possible so that they can help him on the ground, which is an economic burden. He's not worried about the health care. He wants them to keep happy so that they can work on the field. And at the same time, he becomes a burden on that system. So our priority is not to have that burden and bring the farmers in the mainstream. Over to you, Anuji.
Yeah, I think so. I think you responded to the question. So now we have only a couple of minutes. So, Mr. Ayush Nigam, would you like to say something when you wanted to add about your experience a little bit in a couple of minutes?
Yeah. Yes, Mr. Ranjan. Sorry, I just wanted to answer this question actually.
Okay,
so there was, So I feel there is something also very powerful about small farms, and I want to highlight that here. I think the Western farms, or like say farms in Australia, like 1,000 acres is a very, very small farm. Like 10,000 acres, in fact, would also be considered as a smallish farm. So of course, like there are highly mechanized practices, extreme monoculture in practice, completely like non-nature-based farming. What I would say. So I think the power of small farms is that we can go extremely nature-based farming. Is possible. We can go towards that, and there are several examples across India. they have proven to be far more efficient than any large farm. But that's where I think there are two things that come in. One is that the propagation of such practices and convincing the farmers is one thing, and how you can shift to such practices, because doing them wrong is going to be a disaster. So you have to do them right. And I think that's where the power of the right kind of expertise on one hand, or it could be something like AI based models that can kind of design for your particular farm condition, which could also come in future. But what I'm talking about is extremely integrated sort of farming, like the nature does, like the forest works. So I think there is a lot of scope there. I have seen a lot of such examples myself. I have done courses on such regenerative sort of farming practices. I think it is very powerful, and hence we should value the small farms and take it in the right stride. The second point that I feel is the issue with small farmers growing like 40 different products on a 1 acre farm is going to be the supply chain again. And I think that's where, Mr. Ranjan, I think as you were earlier also pointing out, there's a lot to do with the supply chain. And if we can aggregate this produce and have proper supply chain, I am sure that this can be used in the right way, and the farmers can significantly increase their incomes, while also very, very importantly, protecting the environment, because such kind of diverse farming is very replenishing to the environment in terms of water, global warming, soil health, everything, right? And that really matters because it has a very, very big impact. So I think having a very holistic approach, the small farms can be transformed into real powerhouses for rejuvenating our environment, producing a lot more food than what we are producing right now. So I think we need to get into these areas. I feel strongly.
Very well said, Mr. Ayush Nigam, that small farms can also be powerhouses. And that nature-based farming, that has been done in many parts of the country. And even in Uttar Pradesh, in many districts, I've noticed, there have been experiments in nature-based farming. And yes, the productivity results have been equal to that which by using chemical fertilizers and pesticides and others, when used, the results have been almost equal to that. And plus the factors, positive issues about conserving the soil, conserving the fertility and everything. So now I think we have come to the end of our session. It's almost 11:15. I'd like to just end by saying that thank you very much to both the panelists, Mr. Ayush Nigam and Mr. Sudhakar Tomar, for giving their valuable time and coming up with different perspectives about this whole issue about agriculture and about farm to fork, and with particular reference to the state of Uttar Pradesh. I can only end by saying that for the state of Uttar Pradesh, today perhaps nothing is more vital than rejuvenating its agriculture sector and its farmer. If we can really enhance the income of the farmer, as in the budget also they've spoken about doubling the income of the farmers, and also, make farm people move from farm to non-farm activities, right? In the rural areas itself, as I said in my initial presentation about developing rural and industrial agro-based industry hubs. So this kind of a scenario, if it's there, then there is going to be a very big change. There's going to be enhanced food production, enhanced productivity, balanced regional development of the state, and overall improvement or enhancement in the per capita income of the farmers, leading to enhancement in the per capita income of the state. And yes, this will unleash the potential that we are talking about. The unlimited potential that UP has, it is all there, but it is boxed up. It is closed. It has to be opened up. It has to be brought out into the open. And the right kind of reforms are there. The right kind of inputs are given. This is certainly possible. With these words, thank you very much again. Thank you, Mr. Nigam. Thank you, Mr. Tomar. And thank you to all for this participating in this morning session from Farm to Fork. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Dhanyavad.
Thank you, sir. Thank you from